guys, how are you? I hope you're all doing very well this afternoon on this very wet afternoon here in Buenos Aires. I thought I'd do a movie review. This movie is a horror film from the United States, English language, released in the year 2014, directed by Casey Lascala, and this movie is called The Remaining. So The Remaining takes place at a wedding. You've got the main character who's just marrying his long-time girlfriend, and then you've got a few other friends, and there's a little bit of tension between these friends because after witnessing this wedding, their emotions and their relationships come under the microscope. So there's a little bit of tension there, but this is ultimately their day. So the day goes from a day of passion, a day of happiness and joy, to a day of terror as strange things start to happen. The earth is shaking, people just drop dead, and they have no idea what's going on. So they're trying to look for answers, and it actually turns out that this could be a biblical event, and that this could be something that the Bible has said, and basically it's the end of times, and that all these horrible demons and that are coming out, and they're getting people who are basically not, with the religious sort of Christian faith. So these group of friends are going to have to try and find out what they can do in order to try and rectify this issue, and at the same time try and keep out of danger and stay alive, so they can basically make the most of what they have. So whether or not they can do that, that's something you're going to have to find out for yourself, because that's as far as I'm going with my synopsis. Now my thoughts on The Remaining. I was very hesitant coming into this film. Now a lot of people have criticised this movie, and most of the criticisms of this film are down to the fact that it is very religious. It's a Christian film, and I can understand the hatred for that because it is very preachy. It does jam it down your throat. It's not very subtle at all. But I still think that that is not the film's biggest problem. I think that that aspect of this movie wasn't that big a problem, because ultimately it is a horror film. It is trying to preach the word, and it's trying to make you feel scared about not being a believer. And personally for me, I am a Catholic, I am a believer, but even if I wasn't a believer, I would still treat it for the horror film that it is. So I think to really slam it for being over-religious, as I said, yes, that is a negative, but to hate it just for that, it seems that people are doing that, because a lot of reviews I've seen, it seems to be the only criticism, but I just thought that that was the least of this film's problems. Now to start off with, it is found footage, and it also is a standard traditional film, and so there is a mix between them, and I like that aspect. I thought that some of the found footage aspects were very well done, and it just gave a sense of realism, because a lot of these found footage films, you continuously ask yourself, why are you still holding the camera? So when you've got a mixture of found footage and traditional storytelling, you can see what's going on, but at the same time you're not questioning why they're taping everything. So that aspect I really liked. I thought there was some fairly good atmosphere. I thought the special effects were fantastic. Some of these creatures, I love the fact that you don't really get to see the creatures very much. It's more a case of a glimpse, which I thought was a showcase of a film that was aware of its limitations, and I thought it did a very good job at letting you create what these creatures look like through your imagination, and that can be even more haunting than it is seeing some really cheap CGI effects. So I thought the effects were very well done. They weren't they weren't overused, so there is a strong subtlety in the way that this movie is shown through the visuals, but I thought it would have been a lot better if the religious aspect was toned down a little bit and a little bit more subtle, because right at the start of the film, when the bad things start to happen, this lady comes out with straight away, this is a biblical event. Now, that was the last conclusion I would come up with. I would come up with maybe a terrorist attack, or maybe it's an earthquake, it was just a natural sort of catastrophic event, as opposed to going straight for the biblical approach. And so that's why I thought that the movie, it's too impatient to really slam down your throat that this is a religious-based film. And because of that, you lose sense of realism. You can sense that these directors, I think this director was trying too hard to get that religious message across, and therefore a lot of people have been put off by that. And for me, I was put off by the fact that it wasn't very subtle, that it was very obvious that what they were trying to do. The second problem I have with this film was the fact that the characters weren't very likeable. Now you don't hate the characters, but you don't get enough insight into them. At the start of the film, you're straight into this wedding, and it's supposed to give you the impression that just because these two are getting married, you should feel the love, you should feel that there's a connection between the two, but you don't get any connection. There's no chemistry with any of these characters. So when these catastrophic events happen, yes, it looks very good, but then it cuts into relationship talk. And I kept thinking to myself, if I was facing this event, this catastrophic event, a truly horrible event, an unbelievable event, the last thing I'd be talking about is relationships. I would be thinking to myself, okay, we can talk about that later. Right now we have to get out of this predicament. But the movie just cuts in, and then you've got this relationship talk, you've got, a lot of tension between these characters, and you think to yourself, okay, number one, it's not very realistic that they're talking about this. Now, realism in a film like this isn't, at the forefront, but at least try and have these characters act in a normal way. So when you've got them talking about the relationships, because there is no chemistry, there is no background to these characters, you don't get interested, you don't invest your time in this situation, and it comes across as boring. So you're waiting for the demons to come back, and when they're not coming back, I just thought that it dragged on because I really didn't care what was going on. You could mute this section of the film and you would still not get anything from it. You won't be losing anything, because actually hearing them talk about situations that are irrelevant to what you want to see, it just becomes very boring. And I thought that the characters weren't really made any more likeable than they first were at the start of the film. So that was a big problem that I had with it. And so I mean the religious tone of the film is going to put a lot of people off, but for me that was the least of its problems. The biggest problem was the fact that it was trying to give you an insight into very uninteresting characters and trying to make you connect to the romance between these people, when in fact it didn't have any chemistry. So if it's not believable, you don't invest your time, and when you're listening to all this talking between characters that you haven't invested any time in, it becomes a distraction, it just bogs it down, and it was just a very disjointed experience for me. So overall, it's not the worst film I've seen. The cinematography is good, the production is very good for its budget. I thought it was smart in what it was trying to do. It knew its limitations, but unfortunately the story just falls flat. The characters are very, very paper thin, and as a result of that, it just becomes more of an irritant than it is an entertaining movie. So that's a disappointment. Having said that, didn't really expect too much from it, so I would say go out there and see it if you like this type of end of the world stuff, but don't get your hopes up for anything memorable. So overall, for the remaining, I'm going to give it 2 stars. Not coming recommended. You probably see other films that are like this that do it a lot better. Alright guys, that's it for my review. I hope you enjoyed it. Till next time, keep watching movies, and I'll see you later.